Notes on a Conditional Form is the fourth album from English band The 1975, serving as both a companion piece and follow-up to their last album, A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships. This particular album has been hugely anticipated by fans, partly to do with the fact that it's been pushed back a couple of times. It's had at least 2 or 3 release dates in the past couple of years. Since last summer, so almost a whole year now, they have been consistently releasing new music and new singles and new music videos. I think there's been 7 singles in total prior to the release of this album. Pretty much everything about this album has been designed to create the most hype possible. Now, I think that's a tactic that could have very, very easily backfired, considering how strong the last album was, in my personal opinion. I think it's easily their strongest album to date. I think with this album, they've kind of simultaneously lived up to the hype and not lived up to the hype. Now, the first thing you have to address about this album is just how massive it is. It's 22 tracks, it's 80 minutes long. Everything about this album is very ambitious and grand in its scope. It's not just big in terms of its length, but also in terms of its ambition and its sonic variety. That variety shouldn't really be a surprise to any fans going into this album when you consider just how wildly different a lot of the singles were to each other. The song People served as the first single way back in the summer of 2019, and it was easily the sharpest left turn that they'd made in their career. Up to that date, it was essentially a industrial punk protest song. The lyrics were essentially being screamed instead of sung by Matty Healy, and it personally became for me one of my favourite songs of 2019, and I think it was easily their boldest statement up to that point. I think what I appreciate the most about this song is, instead of just attempting to dip their toe into uncharted territory with this very, very aggressive and abrasive song, they fully committed to it, and that commitment shows in the quality of that single. Now, the flip side to this would be the song Me and You Together song, which dropped, I think, January or February this year. That's a dreamlike love song all about unrequited love that sounds as if it's from the opening credits of a teen movie from the early 2000s. Again, they fully commit to the idea and the aesthetic of the song, and this particular song was also a bit of a window into the main themes and concepts of the new album. It essentially has Matty looking inwards to address his ego, his image, and his celebrity, and deconstructing those concepts down to their simplest form. When you're dealing with such weighty issues, personal issues, existential questions, and balancing that with an attempt to cover a wide array of genres, it's always going to be kind of difficult, but I would say for the most part, those attempts paid off on this album, albeit with a few inconsistencies and misfires. For me, running throughout this entire album is a very, very strong sense of self-awareness and a kind of subtle meta-narrative as well, and I think that is most clearly exemplified on the song Nothing Revealed, Everything Denied. This song opens with some serene and very tranquil piano work, with Matty's voice being backed by what sounds like to me as a full church choir. The lyrics on this song, more so than any other song on this album, in my opinion, is mainly concerned with the idea of looking at Matty's own celebrity and image and deconstructing that image. The line where he says, "I never fucked in a car, I was lying," is obviously a very overt reference to the song Love It If We Made It, which was a very, very politically charged but very, very strong song from the last album. The verse on this song is delivered in a very bizarre for the 1975 at least, half-rapped, half-sung kind of way before this kind of booming, deep voice takes over that sounds like it's been chopped and screwed. It's a very, very transformative, self-aware, and emotionally driven song, and it's definitely a highlight on this album. The song The Birthday Party deals with similar kinds of issues, but in my opinion at least, it doesn't do it to the same effect and the same strength as that song. The song very, very openly and honestly addresses Matty Healy's troubles with addiction and drug abuse. It's a very, very slow and meditative song. For me, at least listening to the lyrics, it sounds as if the process of writing this song must have been very therapeutic for Matty Healy. Whilst it's very easy for me, as it should be for most people, to sympathize with the sentiment of the song about dealing with your issues head on, and dealing with addiction. It's not something that is attention grabbing immediately, and the song kind of trails off into nothing. I always have to remind myself that I mustn't construe my sympathy for the narrator of a song with strong songwriting and it being a captivating song. The song Roadkill, for me, is most likely the weakest song on this entire album. When you look at the lyrics just on their own, they're very funny, they're very playful, they're very humorous. It's essentially Matty turning the lens back onto his critic. However, the attempt at a kind of Americana roots song feels very, very awkward and kind of forced just to my ear personally. And I think that's the one thing that holds this album back from being as good as its predecessor. It's that thematic cohesion and consistency. For me, there are some truly amazing ideas all over this album, and there's a very, very strong collection of songs, but that's what it sounds like to me. It just sounds like a collection of songs rather than an album. If you look at the opening song and the closing song, which is People and Guys, for me, these are two of the best songs on the album. I very, very much enjoy both of these tracks, but they have no, or very little, as far as I can see, they have very little lyrical or thematic parallels between one another. And I don't think that's an inherent issue. I don't think you're obliged to do that with opening and closing songs, but it wouldn't be an issue for me if this album and the last album hadn't been very, very overtly marketed as a collection and as an era. That indicates to me that there is some thematic thing that should be gluing these things together. Nonetheless, aside from this, there are still, like I said, some ideas and songs that I very, very much enjoy on this album. Now, being where I'm from, which is London, and being the age I am, I'm in my early 20s, I grew up with the sounds of UK garage playing all over me, and that's an influence that is maybe the strongest influence on this entire album. The song Yeah I Know is kind of a glitchy take on the garage genre. The song has enough variety to keep my attention, but I feel it could have transformed into something more. The song Frail State of Mind, which is the second single that dropped last year, is a much stronger attempt at the 1975's take on this genre. It's a song drenched in anxiety, social anxiety specifically. Of course, considering the world that we're living in now, the lyric where he says, "Go outside" seems unlikely, seems very eerily prophetic. I think the strongest aspect of this song from a lyrical standpoint is the willingness to touch on a very, very sensitive issue when it comes to dealing with mental illness and specifically anxiety. And that aspect is feeling as if you're some kind of burden on others when you're discussing these issues. It's that kind of willingness to openly discuss intrusive thoughts that makes the songwriting captivating. Instrumentally, it's very, very tight, and it's kind of overwhelming. It's a bit like physically drowning in anxiety, but for me, this is one of the strongest songs on the album. Shiny Collarbone was definitely a what the fuck moment when I first heard it. As soon as I heard Cutty Rank's voice being chopped up, it sounds like garage for the digital age. It's easily the least 1975 song I've heard up to this point in time. Obviously, partly to do with the fact that Matty Healy doesn't make a vocal appearance on this song as well. However, of the collection of garage-inspired tracks on this album, I think the strongest has to be I Think There's Something You Should Know. It's probably the most overtly existential song on the album. The dreamlike quality of the instrumental definitely plays into that feeling as well. The lyrics on this song are probably the simplest on the entire album, but as Matty has said and he's intended, he wanted to convey the biggest and most ideas in the simplest way possible, and I think this is the song that achieves that the best. This is easily one of the strongest songs on the album, and it's an advert for what I feel the band were trying to achieve with this album. Aside from Shiny Collarbone, another what the fuck moment I kind of had was with the song Tonight I Wish I Was Your Boy. It opens with something you'd expect from an early 2000s Kanye song with a pitch-shifted sample from The Temptations. And the sample gives way to a very strange, bizarre mesh of pop, synth music, backed by a very, very strong reggae groove. Once again, which is commonplace on this particular album, it's yet another confessional love song with underlying themes of anxiety and uncertainty. There's actually 2 songs in this album that use FK Twigs as a kind of feature. The first one is the very, very 80s inspired If You're Too Shy, and the second is What Should I Say? I'm a very big fan of the former, but it's the latter one that is stunning. To me, this song sounds like a slower, more brooding and darker version of the song Two Time from the previous album, and pretty much the entire instrumental is built around these ethereal, trademark FK Twigs vocal samples. Once again, the lyrics are very simple, but they do get very big ideas across. For me, this song is about Matty Healy addressing his platform, what he should use said platform for, and whether he should use it at all, and whether he has an obligation to discuss wider social issues. Now, like previously mentioned, this album does cover a lot of genres, but this specific song is the one I find the hardest to place into any kind of discernible genre. Notes on a Conditional Form is, although it's very clearly marketed as a companion piece to the last album, it is very, very different from any of their previous work. It's very scatterbrained, it's very eclectic, and at times it can be quite unfocused. It easily could have been at least 20 to 30 minutes shorter, but as a listener, I appreciate the ambition and the willingness to experiment with different sounds. Of course, the drawback with experimenting with so many different sounds is that inevitably not all of those experiments are going to pay off. As an album listening experience, when you sit down and listen to it start to finish, I can understand, and even for me, it can be kind of frustrating with the constant tonal shifts and genre changes, and I think it's very easy to see that could grate on some fans. And of course, there's always been this kind of criticism floating around the kind of songwriting that Matty Healy is accustomed to, and that criticism is that it's very, very self-indulgent, it can sometimes be pretentious, and it can sometimes be a bit of like an ego boost. I think that criticism has been taken on board, as I think it was done in a more creative way on the last album, but on this album is a bit more concerned with addressing that celebrity image and trying to deconstruct that image of what it means to be. I think there's 2 arguments to be made about the kind of songwriting on this album. I think the first one is that he has addressed that a lot of his lyrics were in the past self-indulgent, and it was just essentially stroking his ego, and he has flipped the script kind of to address his ego. But counterintuitively, you could argue that, well, deconstructing your own ego is just another way of stroking your own ego, because again, you're just talking about yourself. But I think there's enough sonic variety and lyrical variety on this album that I personally don't subscribe to that second argument. Nonetheless, I do believe that some of their best work is on this album, and there are more than a handful of tracks that I will personally be returning to. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and dong the bell, and I will see you next time.